Gentlemen, welcome to Kingsport in Northeast Tennessee. You have been given the format instructions, so let's just get started. We'll start with the winner of the coin toss, Bill Lee.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the privilege to be here. Special day for me. It's my birthday. Thanks. Thank you for coming to my birthday party. And thank you, Carl, for tweeting happy birthday messages to me today. I appreciate that. And by the way, I also want to just publicly say to Carl that I'm grateful for the tone of this campaign. It didn't have to be that way, for the lack of, in spite of the fact that we have differences and we've had the opportunity to share our plans and our thoughts, as different as they may be, it's been an environment that the tone has been good and it's been positive. And we're only 28 days away, and that's unique in today's political environment, and I'm grateful for that. So thank you. And thank you all for being here. Proud to be in Upper East Tennessee again, a place I've grown to love. Maria and I have grown to deeply appreciate you all in this community. For those who I haven't introduced myself to, I am a cattle farmer, third generation ag producer. I am a businessman who runs heating and air conditioning, plumbing, and electrical business of about 1,200 employees, mostly skilled tradespeople. And I'm a man who, in part because of a great tragedy in my life that God used in a powerful way to change my perspective, I am a person who believes that the highest call for my life is to serve, which is what got me involved in the inner city and a passion around education, got me involved in mentoring men coming out of prison and a passion for public safety, and ultimately was what challenged me and Maria to pray about this and make this decision to serve. So I'm honored to be here tonight, happy to share our thoughts on this stage. Thank you.
Mr. Dean.
Thank you. Well, first of all, thank you to Eastman and to all the sponsors and newspapers for putting this great event together. It is great to be here. This is much better weather than I've been in recently. It's a lot cooler, and I appreciate that. And Bill, happy birthday. And in recognition of the quality of this campaign, I am not going to, as Ronald Reagan would say, use your youth and inexperience against you in this race. I will.
Thank you.
It is wonderful to be here, and I just want to talk a little bit about why I'm running. I'm running because I'm convinced that the people of Tennessee want a governor who's going to be pragmatic, have common sense, who's going to focus on the issues that matter to voters. I don't think the state is looking for anyone who's going to be looking at issues solely from a party angle or be an extremist. You know, to me, when I ran for mayor in Nashville, I had to run in a nonpartisan race. I had to get Democrats, Republicans, and independents to vote for me. And then when you do that job, you don't do it on partisan lines. You do it on what's best for the city, what's going to move it forward, what's going to create a better future, what's going to create more opportunities for people. And that's what I want to do for the state of Tennessee. In my mind, the issues that we need to focus on are, number one, public education. It is absolutely the most important thing for us to get right. It is critical that we be a state that is not only producing more college graduates, but is also giving young people an opportunity to select a professional, a vocational career or a trade, something that will allow them to make a good living and have a productive life. I think we need to make sure that we're always working on our economy. We need to be a strong state with a vibrant economy, creating jobs and opportunities and letting people live the American dream. And then we need to take care of health care. We need to be a state that recognizes that we owe it to each one of us to look out for each other, and we want all of our citizens to be healthy. Thank you.
We'll start our questions with Mr. Lee. There is a growing recognition in this region, mainly among the companies, organizations such as Eastman, Ballot, and East Tennessee State University, to work together. What can the state do to foster regionalism here in Northeast Tennessee?
I think that regionalism is the key to the transformation, accelerated transformation of this region. As all of you know here, job creation, population growth has lagged in this region relative to areas like Nashville, Chattanooga, even Knoxville. And so it's important that we recognize that if we want Tennessee to be a leader in this country, and I believe that it can, then every region has to be prosperous. Every region has to have has to have the appropriate focus. And I run a company that has multiple branches, and when we have one branch that's not doing as well as the rest, even if the balance sheet in our company is good, if we have one office that isn't doing as well as it could do, then we take the resources of our company to that office. That's what we need to do in state government. We need to take the resources to partner, because I don't think government is the answer. Government will not solve the economic woes of any region or increase the economic prosperity in any region. The private sector, the nonprofit community, in partnership with government can in fact do that. And there are remarkable examples of public-private partnerships right here. The aviation park, the academic village. There are profound, you have remarkable organizations in this community that are doing remarkable work. And when we partner with them to produce real change in this environment, we can actually have this region, and it is truly important that we look at it as a region, that we can have this region doing significantly better from an economic development standpoint than it even is today.
Mr. Dean?
Yeah, I've long been convinced that regionalism is absolutely essential, and that is a key thing to development around our state. One of the things I did as mayor, I took a trip with our Chamber of Commerce to Denver, and while there I learned about the Denver's mayor caucus, where they got all the mayors of all the counties and cities around Denver to meet on a regular basis and then to work on regional issues together. And so I did what any self-respecting person would do. I went back to Nashville and stole the idea and created the Middle Tennessee Mayor's Caucus, where we all meet on a regular basis and we would discuss issues of common concern, particularly transit, but also economic development and a variety of other issues. I think we've benefited from having a Chamber of Commerce in Middle Tennessee that is focused on regional issues and regional planning. That allows for all areas of of Middle Tennessee to succeed. And I know that the same can be done, and it actually is occurring here on some level. I've attended the Chamber dinner this past year. There are programs such as transit, I think aviation clearly here, education. There are lots of different outdoor sports. There are a lot of different things you could be doing together, making yourself stronger. And the state has a role to play in that. From my experience as mayor, I know that the county mayors and city mayors can only go so far to work out cross-county solutions. And at some point, the state needs to step up and get involved and be a leader and help make those solutions a reality. That doesn't mean the state pays for everything, but it does mean that the state has to make those things work. And that includes the planning, the design, helping with the funding mechanisms. All those things require state leadership, and I'd be anxious to work on that. It's something that I'm very interested in.
Mr. Lee, do you have a 30-second rebuttal?
No.
Okay, we'll move to the next question. Mr. Dean, what are your thoughts and feelings on the absence of truth in sentencing in Tennessee, and how, if anything, would you do to reform it? Or what would you do to reform it?
Well, that's a great question. I spent 15 or 16 years of my life as a public defender. I was a public defender out of law school and then was elected to that position 3 times. And during the time that I was in the public defender's office, we went through really revising our criminal codes and looking at truth in sentencing as an issue. And I recall the leadership, Andrea Conti was very much involved and provided leadership on this issue. I think it's important to everybody involved in the criminal justice system that there be truth in sentencing, that the public understand and know what the actual punishment is and know that that punishment will be actually followed. Now, that may mean you have to review sentences and look at how we're doing things, and that should be a nonpartisan discussion. There's lots of room in the criminal justice system right now for reform, but I think it only happens if you actually have people working together. And what happened in the late 80s is you put together a commission that was able to bring together Democrats, Republicans, and experts to figure out the best way to do it. But letting victims know, particularly victims understand that a sentence is real and that the sentence really means something, will only heighten respect for and belief in the criminal justice system. And that's equally important for everybody involved. And it's particularly important on violent crimes that people understand that these sentences are real.
Mr. Lee.
You know, years ago, I got involved in a reentry program called Men of Valor, and we intersect men in prison about a year before they get out, work with them through transitional housing and job placement. And I actually decided to mentor a man leaving prison, and I spent one morning a week, every week with him, 5:30 in the morning for years, through his reentry process. And when I look at the overall issue of public safety and recidivism and truth in sentencing and criminal justice, I think that we can be tough on crime and smart on crime. One of the things I think, I've said many, many times, people want a good job and a good school for their kid in a safe neighborhood. Safe neighborhoods all across Tennessee are critically important. So the way we intake offenders is very important. The way we use alternative sentencing for nonviolent, low-level offenders is important. The way we re-enter folks into society is very important to all of us. The fact that 95% of every person sitting in a prison cell in the state of Tennessee is going to come out. They're all coming out into our communities. And right now, 50% of them will recidivate and return to prison within the first 2 years. They will recommit a crime in our neighborhoods. The way we reenter those offenders is very, very important. But it's also important that for the most violent offenders in the system, we have truth in sentencing. We understand that there are appropriate victims' rights. Victims, particularly of egregious violent offenses, need to know what the offense is, how long the person is going to be there. And for those particular crimes, it's appropriate. Governor Haslam appointed me to a task force on sentencing reform and recidivism, and we began work in that area, and I look forward to doing it in the future.
Mr. Dean?
Yeah, along those lines, it is true 95% of the people who are in prison will get out, and it behooves us then to think that we do not want them to return. And so having programs for prisoners who are about to be released involving education, drug or alcohol, mental health treatment is really important. And then to have a pathway for people when they get out to have the supports to stay out. You know, there are programs. I was on the board at Dismas House, which is a faith-based group that works with people who are recently released, and reconciliation that deals with inmates' families. We've got to support folks, and the private sector and the public sector can work together to get that done.
Thank you. Mr. Lee, the Ballard merger is important to both the Northeast Tennessee and Southwest Virginia. In Tennessee, the health commissioner determines the future of Ballard's certificate of public advantage. What are you going to be looking for in the next health commissioner?
I think that the Ballard Health merger has been extremely important to this community. I supported that merger, and the next governor will work to enforce the certificate, the COPA. And you know, I think one of the things that's important about this merger and about what it means to this community is that it's a change in a model. And that's what we have to do in healthcare, is continuously be looking at changing the model. This particular model change is going to result in about $80 million in investment from Ballard into behavioral health in this community, $80 million around chronic disease, and a partnership with East Tennessee and others around $80 million in education for healthcare professionals. That is something that I believe is very important for this community. It's a great step forward in a new model that will provide greater services and greater access, particularly to the rural communities in this region. And so the next health director has to be someone who is not only an expert in healthcare, but is innovative and creative in their thinking about how it is that we're going to take a fundamentally broken healthcare system across this state in many places and advance that forward with new thinking. Tennessee has some of the most brilliant healthcare minds in the world. We have some of the largest healthcare companies in all of the world located right here in this state. If any state can transform a healthcare model, we can do that. And some of those minds are right here in this community in Ballard Health. And so I'm grateful for what they're doing. I look forward to working with them throughout the COPA process, throughout this successful merger that's happened here.
Mr. Dean.
Yeah. I think the merger was a good idea, and I hope it all goes well, and I think it will. I think when you think about your next health commissioner, the issue of health, to me, comes down to two parts. I mean, one is the need for Tennessee just to be a healthier state. You know, when you look at Tennessee and you look at public health indicators, whether it's diabetes, whether it's obesity, low birth weights, heart disease, we rank in the bottom 10 in almost all of them. We are an unhealthy state, and I think we want our health department to be pushing for our state to do better and better and being a leader in that way. I think you also have to consider the way that health care is provided and the costs related to it. You know, here we are close to the border of Virginia, where Virginia this past year decided to do Medicaid expansion. They are putting themselves in a position where they'll be getting far more Medicaid dollars, putting them in a spot where they'll be able to do more for their citizens, better able to support hospitals all over their state, and then be able to free up state dollars to put into things such as mental health and then more into education. And that is happening all along our borders and all around the country. And so I, of course, am an advocate for Medicaid expansion. I think it would help hospitals across our state. It certainly would help the 300,000 people who are uninsured. And it would put our state in a position where we'll be healthier, because people who don't have insurance never get a checkup. They never get to know about problems that they may have and then be able to take preventative steps to be healthier. It's a problem we can solve now, and we should.
Mr. Lee, rebuttal?
Well, I think the most important problem we have that we need to solve in this state is the rising cost of health care. What we have is an unsustainable march toward an ending that's not good for Tennessee. Our rates in our company went up 29% 2 years ago, 19% last year. The rising rate cost of health care far exceeds inflation, and just moving forward without changing the system, without changing the model, but just moving forward with that same system and putting more dollars after a system that's fundamentally broke is the wrong approach.
Mr. Dean, if a bill for Medicaid expansion passed the legislature, would you sign it? If not, how would you protect rural health care?
I should have used my other question for something else. Yes, I would sign it happily, and I think that's what needs to happen in our state. You know, people can disagree about this issue, and I know this is one of the matters that Mr. Lee and I don't agree on, and I know he's talked about, you know, this is really need 15 or 20-year planning to get to where we need to be in terms of health care. But this is a real issue that is affecting real people in Tennessee right now. There are people who don't get the health care that they need because they're not insured. There are people who don't go to the doctor because they feel they can't. They just feel they're not entitled to without insurance. There are people who face bankruptcy because they try to pay their bills. There are people who will go to the hospital and the hospitals don't get reimbursement, and that results in hospitals having major problems. We have literally given up about $4 billion. And that is money that is not being saved for us, but that is money that is being spent in other states. And there are now billboards appearing in Tennessee from Arkansas or whoever's paying for it saying, thank you for paying for our health care. We need to get our Medicaid dollars back here. We don't need to be exporting dollars and not bringing them back. That's sound fiscal policy. There will be many opportunities, and we need to continue to look at ways of improving the way we provide health care over the years to come. But we can't say we're not going to get this done in 15 or 20 years. This is something that we could take a meaningful step like the state of Virginia did just this year and make health more available to our people in our state, make our hospitals more financially viable, and make Tennessee just a stronger and more competitive state.
Mr. Lee.
I do disagree. We do disagree on this. I actually believe we have a fundamentally flawed system in this state. I already expressed the fact that our healthcare, the cost of healthcare far exceeds inflation. That is setting us down a path, and taking federal money is not free money. Putting federal dollars into a plan that is going to ultimately, in my view, fail is a bad idea for every Tennessean. We shouldn't expose Tennesseans to that. We expanded Medicaid in this state once before, and we were told that it would lower costs. And it ended up failing because we couldn't afford it. It almost broke the state. and we rolled off hundreds of thousands of people from that Medicaid program. I don't want to do that again in the state of Tennessee, and I don't want the next governor to have to do it either. We also were told when Obamacare was implemented, another big federal program, that costs would decrease and that we would be able to keep our doctors. Neither of those 174% average premium increases since Obamacare came into effect. Now, what I don't want to do is bring in federal program number 3 and have a federal government approach to what I believe should be a Tennessee solution. You know, I did talk about a 15-year plan. We do strategic planning in our company. The first day we do that, we talk about where do we want Lee Company to be in 15 years. And then we bring it back to what are we going to do today to get us there. That's what we need to do with healthcare in the state of Tennessee. We need to make a plan, where do we want it to be, and what are we going to do right now to alleviate the challenges that we have for those that are uninsured, alleviate those by lower the cost, and move to a plan that will be sustainable and will work for Tennessee far into the future.
This is not a new problem. We have been discussing this since Governor Haslam, a Republican governor, came up with a recommendation that would protect our state, would actually have the hospitals paying for some of the entry fees of getting this done, an excellent program, and that was not given a hearing. We've now known that we've lost $4 billion, we have hospitals closing, and we have 300,000 people without insurance. During this time, I have not heard from the Republican Party or members of the legislature who wouldn't hear this proposal what their alternative is. What are they going to do to help health in Tennessee now?
Mr. Lee, with unemployment, business, and industry finding it increasingly harder to find and recruit top talent, what can state government do to keep that talent in Tennessee and bring it here?
Could you repeat the first part of that question?
With low unemployment, businesses are finding it hard to find top talent to come to work for them. What can the state do to bring that talent here and to keep it here in Tennessee?
Yeah, the low unemployment rate, we do have a very low unemployment rate now. I will say that there's a little bit of a mixed message there because we have a not so favorable workforce engagement rate. We have a lot of folks sitting on the sidelines. And one of the reasons for that, in my view, is that we do very little in our public education system toward workforce development, particularly for those 4 out of 10 kids in our state who do not go to college. And I'm an employer of 1,200 mostly skilled tradespeople who actually started a trade school 10 years ago and have put 1,000 people through that. We need to have that kind of an approach in high schools all across the state. When we have a skilled workforce, then we will attract the kind of businesses into this community that will keep the talent here. That combined with a business-friendly environment. I worked with Governor Haslam, who, by the way, has endorsed my campaign. I worked with Governor Haslam to implement tort reform, a business-friendly idea that makes it easier for businesses to operate in this state. I look forward to looking at opportunities. For example, our franchise and excise tax that makes us non-competitive with adjacent states. I look forward to looking for ways that we create in this state a business-friendly environment that attracts the kind of companies that cause the talent in this state to want to stay here.
Mr. Dean.
Yeah, there was a writer, Richard Florida, who's a sociologist, talked about the 3 T's that I think are really relevant in recruiting talent. And so what you need for talent is you got to have educated folks and you got to have educational opportunities. I think the biggest challenge Tennessee is going to face in the next 10, 15 years is going to be workforce development. We're going to attract the jobs because of our tax structure, because of the business-friendly nature of the state, but we got to have the people here to perform them. So that means investing in education, have more college graduates, and have technology and vocational programs available for all students who are interested in those. We need to have technology. We need to be willing to work to attract businesses that are sort of on the cutting edge, businesses of the future. You got to have a very proactive and involved economic development department doing that. I think we were able to do some of that work in Nashville successfully, but having technology and technology workers is going to be key. And then I would add sort of a double thing to keep it at 3, tolerance and sort of quality of life. Young people are going to go where it's friendly. Young people are going to go where talent is appreciated, and they're going to go where other young people want to be. And if you are a place that attracts talent, if you're known as a place that is tolerant, that is friendly, that is welcoming, you're going to thrive. And those will be the states that are really going to take off over the next 20 and 30 years. Quality of life is a big part of that. This part of the state is the best example of that. I mean, you have such natural beauty, such great outdoor sports. I've already mentioned the nice temperature today. You've got so much going for you in that regards. And you get the rest done. This place has, endless potential, endless potential.
Mr. Lee?
To add to that, and certainly this region, and I've talked to civic leaders in this region about one of the reasons I think that we have a real opportunity here to advance economic development and to attract talent is the uniqueness of this region. But if we can expand technology, people will move to places that they want to live in, like Upper East Tennessee, if they have access to technology to run their businesses, to educate their children, have access to medical through telemedicine. What Bright Ridge is doing in this community is got to be done all across the state of Tennessee, and that's expand broadband to far-reaching communities throughout the state.
Mr. Dean, this is a follow-up to our previous question. How does public education better prepare all of our young people for a life after high school graduation?
I think public education, and this is one thing we should never lose track of, public education is really the key to the success of our country in the last 150, 170 years. The investments that we have made as a country in saying that we will, through our public tax dollars, support public education so that is available to all students has resulted in a great country. Now, we have had challenges that have become more and more apparent over the course of the last 30 and 40 years about what we need to be doing in education. Funding has always been an issue, but we should do nothing to take away from the strength of public education. And this would be another area that Mr. Lee and I disagree upon. Mr. Lee is an advocate for vouchers. I have the scars on my back for my work in education reform, but I do not believe in vouchers, because vouchers actually take public dollars and put them into a private education system. And by taking those dollars away from the public education system, it slowly undermines it. And if you're in a community that is smaller, if you have one high school or two high schools instead of having, like we have in Nashville, 30 or so, you are really undermining that school and the ability to provide education. To me, education should be the top priority for the state in terms of funding, in terms of what we work on every day and what we talk about it. I did it as mayor of Nashville. I went through a recession, I went through a flood, I protected education. Then I went through a boom where we had 70,000 new jobs in Nashville, and I funneled as much money as I could toward education. We increased the budget by 37%. That's the biggest investment you can make in the future of your city. That's the biggest investment we can make in the future of this great state.
Mr. Lee.
Every single child in the state of Tennessee deserves to have a high-quality education, and the public education system is the backbone of that system. It is by far the largest opportunity. It's the way that most of our children are going to be educated. And so we can't do anything that's going to diminish the quality of public education in this state. And I will work to make certain that doesn't happen. I chaired the YMCA in Middle Tennessee, and we have an at-risk inner-city program called YCAP. And I met a kid at a YCAP lunch one day, and my engagement with him caused me to want to engage deeper in his life. I decided to mentor that kid. I drove into a very troubled neighborhood once a week, every week, and spent one evening a week with that young man for 5 years. He was failing every class when I met him in his poor performing school, and I had him move to another public school that I'd heard about. And his educational trajectory absolutely changed. And what I saw is the kid's very future was transformed by the power of a good education. And that is what started a desire and a passion in me to believe and work toward the realization that every kid in Tennessee deserves to have the opportunity that he did to have his future brightened by the education that he received. And that was a public education through a charter school, actually. So I believe that choice is very important. One of the reasons that his educational outcomes were improved is because he had a choice about where he went to school. My children were public schooled, homeschooled, private schooled, and this young man I mentored went to a charter school. Choice elevates the entire system, including our public school systems, and that's what I work for as governor.
Mr. Dean.
Yeah. Well, of course, charter schools in Tennessee are public schools. It is illegal in Tennessee to have a for-profit charter, and I think that offers choice and has a role in urban systems. But, one thing I wanted to add to sort of directly to the question you originally asked me was about why it's so important to have a high school education. I am more and more convinced as I go through this process and read about problems around the country that we really need to step up our civic education in high school. That I think it would be a great thing for every part of the country and certainly for our state if we did more on civics and government in our high schools.
Mr. Lee, Northeast Tennessee has been a hotbed of illegal opioid activity. How can the state work with the federal government more effectively to tackle this crisis?
Oh. Crisis is not even a good enough word. And actually, Maria and I attended a ribbon cutting at the hospital here. The opening of the wing committed entirely to the care of addicted newborns. And particularly in this part of the state, it is a tragedy what's happening. 1,700 overdose deaths in this state, and that's climbing. For me, it's very important that we work with the federal government to be certain that the role that the federal government had in this will further assistance in their eradication of it for our state. But for me, there's three pieces to this. One of them is the system itself. Too many pills, too many prescriptions, too many pain clinics that are leading to a state that's one of the most overprescribed states in the country. Number two, we have a law enforcement challenge, because when you suppress the system, then you raise fentanyl and heroin and now meth again, and we have a law enforcement issue regarding the illegal trafficking of drugs in the state. So I think that we ought to have trafficking laws that are the stiffest in the country. We ought to make this state a place where drug traffickers do not want to operate, and address that piece of it. And then the third and most significant part of this is treatment and rehabilitation and mental health. And we're just beginning to understand how adverse childhood experiences and how trauma in life contributes to addiction. So getting our hands around the mental health part of it is critically important as we go forward in the state.
Mr. Dean.
I mean, I agree that crisis might not even be the word to measure what is happening in our state. Certainly, we are one of the states that has suffered from this scourge more than others. I too have been to the wing at the hospital here in Johnson City and seen those babies and felt the pain of families. I think we're now in a position where we used to say this about cancer. Almost everybody seems to know somebody who's been affected by this by opioids in some way or another. I think the state's on the right track. I think what the legislature did with controlling prescriptions was the right thing. Obviously, that's going to have to be monitored to make sure it's working and to make sure that it has all the teeth it needs to get the job done. I think it's important that law enforcement be empowered to do what it needs to do. I mean, clearly there are people making money off the deaths of all these people across our state and the suffering of families, and that is wrong. There is a mixture of fentanyl with other drugs that on a street level deserves a strong law enforcement component to help resolve that issue. There needs to be more public education about the dangers of these drugs. And then I think treatment is the thing. This is something we're not going to incarcerate our way out of. This is not something that the criminal justice system is going to solve. It's going to be treatment. And again, I would mention that we were not in a position when this first became publicly known at the level that it is now, that we needed to have more treatment facilities, and we were hurt by not having Medicaid expansion. We have not had the treatment facilities we need. I'll just give you an example sort of close to home for me is Renewal House, a nonprofit in Nashville, does fantastic work, treats mothers, treats pregnant women, and they have a 50 or 60 person waiting list, and they're serving a big geographical area. We need to be doing a whole lot more of that, and the state has a role in that.
Mr. Lee?
I believe, too, that this crisis is so enormous that state government is never going to solve this problem. Particularly when we begin to become aware of the enormity of the mental health piece to this. And, I have said that when I'm governor, we'll have an office of faith-based and community or initiatives where our nonprofit community, our community organizations, our faith community, where we create an environment where they can play a bigger role in addressing some of the most egregious societal challenges we have, and that is very important in this way that we attack the opioids in the state.
Mr. Dean, both of you have talked publicly about your education reforms. How do you propose paying for those reforms?
Well, first, I think, to me, the biggest thing you do as a chief executive in government is you set your priorities, and your priorities reflect what you think is most important to move the state ahead, to create a better future for the state. I have experience with this. I did this as mayor. I ran for mayor on a platform where it was public education, public safety, and economic development. Then about 8 months after I took office in '07, and not because I took office, we go into the Great Recession. And then about a year after that, we have the Great Flood. And so I managed the city through some really tough economic times, and I had to make tough decisions. And we had cut everywhere. We cut most departments 15, 20%. But because I knew what my priority was, I didn't cut education. I protected it, and I did everything I could to put more money there, and I did the same thing for law enforcement. And then during my second term, after things took off in the city and the boom began, and we weren't rolling in money, but we had the ability to do some things, I was able to do what I wanted to do from the beginning. We increased school budgets by 37%. We did about $620 million in capital programs, and we moved starting teacher pay from 30th in the state to 3rd. We worked hard on education reform. We worked hard on offering families choices, and it was a passion for me. So the fundamental answer is education has to be the priority. If times are tough, you cut and protect it. If times are better and the pie is growing, like we've been through in the last few years, you cut a bigger slice for education. It's what we have to get right.
Mr. Lee.
One of the most primary responsibilities of governor is to manage a budget. And as a business person, I manage a company that has a $250 million budget. And we went through a challenging, I made reference to a tragedy in my life. I stepped away from my business for a couple years and came back, and we were in deep trouble. Had to cut our budget by 30% and lay off hundreds of workers in order to save that company, make very difficult decisions about how it is that we would manage a budget in order to save a company and move forward. In business, if you don't manage a budget, you go bankrupt. In government, if you don't manage a budget, you raise taxes. And so managing a budget from a government standpoint, from my perspective, is about determining the difference between what you need and what you want, and making certain that you manage that budget in a way that commits resources to those things that you need, like education and like transportation. We commit resources to those things that we need, and education is significantly one of those. But I will also say that while I believe we need to commit appropriate resources, we need to always look at raising teacher pay and make sure we're competitive with adjacent states. We need to look at our funding formulas for education. Pouring more money into the system is not going to solve it. Washington, D.C. public school systems are one of the highest dollars per student in the systems in the country, and have some of the worst outcomes there are. That's why I think that we fund appropriately, but we actually look for innovative, creative ways. And you do that through choice, and you look at things that work in choices, and then bring those working models, best practices, to bear in the public system. That's how we improve education without just spending money on the same way we've been doing it for the past 25 years.
Mr. Dean.
Well, I would disagree with sort of simplifying things by saying that when government doesn't have money, it raises taxes. I have been in government, and that's not how it works. As I talked about my first term, we had to make all of the tough decisions that any business has to make. We had to end positions in the government. We had to make the cuts, and that's what we do. But I do think you have to look at education differently. I think if there are savings, you always look for them. You ask them to propose a budget with reductions. But nobody in Tennessee can seriously argue that we are spending too much money on education in the state. We're not.
Mr. Lee, how does Tennessee rise to the top of the heap for businesses and industries looking to expand or relocate?
Oh, I think we rise to the top by creating a workforce in this state. We have, and I said this before, I'll expand on that a bit. We have 4 out of 10 kids in this state who don't go to college. And we don't have an education system that provides a pathway for hope for them at all. We have ignored vocational, technical, and I would submit, being a person that's involved in the agriculture industry, that's 13% of our economy. When we start talking about the economy of Tennessee, we have to talk about agriculture, and we have to look at an appropriate focus for that. But we have ignored vocational, technical, and agricultural education in our public school systems for decades. Now, we've done a real good job of raising the level of post-secondary attainment, particularly in four-year colleges, and we need to continue down that path. But there is a reason that we had to start a trade school and educate 1,000 in the trades in our company. And my company, by the way, was named by the Tennessean as the best large company to work for in 2017 in the city of Nashville. And yet we can't fill the skilled trade job openings in our company that we have because of this lack of workforce. Companies like mine would not come to an environment, to a state where they don't have a workforce. So we have to seriously change the way we look at high school. And once again, I say we look at what do we want high school to look like in 15 years in Tennessee, and then come back to how it is that we're going to make that transformation. I also believe it starts early in K through 12. It's not just a post-secondary. We have conversations in the 7th and 8th grade around being a doctor, a lawyer, a cosmetologist, a coder, a welder, and then create an education system that provides a pathway for all of those choices. That's how we'll create a developed, skilled workforce, and that's how we attract industry into Tennessee.
Mr. Dean.
I think the way you succeed at recruiting companies it's complex, and there are several things you have to get right. I mean, number one, you have to acknowledge it's important to have the basics right, and in Tennessee, we pretty much do. We have a very good business climate. We have a tax structure that appeals to outside businesses to locate here. I think the federal tax structure now makes us even more attractive than we were in the past, so those things are pluses. We've got generally temperate weather. We are located in the center of the country. We have interstates going through us. When I was mayor and I would work on economic development, and we increased the number of jobs during my time as mayor by 70,000. That's not just me, that's the private sector and everybody else helping, pitching in to get that done. But you know, you can talk about Tennessee and people come and they see it and they want to be here. But I think you got to take care of the basics. And the basics to me is, you got to invest in public education, you got to invest in public safety, and you got to continue to work on economic development. And that is the same thing in every town and county in the state. It's the same formula. If you have a good quality of life, if you have the workers there, if you have the school system, if you have the vocational programs, you're going to succeed. And I would add to that healthcare fits into this. I mean, we have the mega site where the county where the mega site's in, the hospital's closed. It's boarded up. And that doesn't help. But so it's taking care of having a strong community, knowing what your strengths are, being able to talk about them. And then I go back to what I mentioned in the last question about being a place that understands the importance of technology, understands the importance of talent, and understands the importance of tolerance. And that's a recipe for success. That's a recipe for economic prosperity.
Mr. Lee?
I would agree that education, and not just workforce development for the vocational, technical, and agricultural side, but our public education system has to be challenged. We have to challenge the status quo. We're in the bottom half of states in America in our educational outcomes, in our public school systems. We can do better than that. And there are ways that can be done. I just recently received the endorsement from the largest public school district superintendent in our state, in Shelby County Public Schools. He and I have met and worked together. They're making innovative, creative changes there, and that's what we need to do in our public school systems across the state.
Mr. Dean, the state of Tennessee gives out economic incentives that attract companies to come to this state. Does that program need to be reviewed, reformed, scaled back, or added to?
Oh, I think it always needs to be reviewed. I do think it's one of the fundamental things you do in government is you need to review all your programs, make sure they're working, make sure they're accomplishing the goals you set. You know, I think it's a very healthy thing, and we always did this in terms of budgets, that you ask departments to come in every year, no matter how good the economy is, with a cut budget, showing us where they might cut 5 or 10%. You do that to everybody. What I think we need to be aggressive in economic development. I think we need to focus our energies on those parts of the state that need the most help. So there are parts of our state in rural Tennessee that are losing population, that don't have the money to fund their education systems properly, that don't have access to rural broadband, that need jobs, and that's where our focus should be. In terms of how we handle incentives, in local government, all this stuff is public. I mean, you got to go to the council to get approval. There are no secrets. It's all laid out there. And local governments have been able to do that, and I think the state can be a lot more transparent and get that information out so everybody understands what the deal is on the front end.
Mr. Lee.
You know, I've always said that a job created in Tennessee is really better than a job brought to Tennessee. So I do think that attracting businesses through incentives is really important. We need to do that. And I think that the way we do that, we need to always be looking at that process. We especially need to have real transparency, at least on the backside of those transactions, so that Tennessee taxpayers know how much they actually paid for the jobs that were brought into this state. Every deal that is made needs to stand on its own. And, in our company, we're in the construction business, so we oftentimes bid projects. And our guys will come to me and say, there's a project out there that we want to get, and we have got to get it. And I say, there is no project that we have to have. There is no company that we have got to get to locate in this state. We need to make sure that every incentive deal is a good deal for Tennesseans. That's the first thing. And then secondly, we need to make sure that we pay the right price for every job that we bring in here. I do think that incentives drive behavior, and we want to attract businesses into it. We want to have an aggressive economic and community development attractor to this state, and that includes the right kind of incentives that have the right kind of transparency behind them. But we also need to have an environment in our state. I said a job created here is better than one brought here. How we create jobs is we have skilled workers out there. Probably 25 companies have been started from my company by folks who are incentivized to start their own. We create an environment, a regulatory environment that makes it easy for people to start a business, an environment like licensures. We need to look at onerous licenses that make it difficult for small business owners to start. That's the way that we can actually create jobs in Tennessee as well as attract them through incentives.
Mr. Dean.
I've had the experience of working with both the Bredesen administration and the Haslam administration on economic development, and I found both administrations essentially understood that the goals were to retain jobs here, but also to bring in good new jobs and to increase prosperity in our state. And that should be our goal. And then underlining that should be a desire for transparency. And of course, we only want the deals that make sense. For every one deal that is done, there are 5 or 6 or more that aren't done because they don't make sense.
We're going to wrap up the evening with our closing statements. We'll start with Mr. Dean.
Well, thank you. The time has flown by, and I've enjoyed my time here with you all. Let me just say that it is humbling to run for governor, and I think my training in life has put me in a position where I can do this job. My background is that of a lawyer, and don't hold that against me, but I graduated from law school in 1978, and I became a public defender, an assistant public defender. And that work was important to me because I felt every day I was helping people. I felt I was right involved, right in the middle of where problems existed in our society. I learned a lot. I learned a lot about alcoholism. I learned a lot about drug addiction. I learned a lot about poverty, and I learned a lot about mental illness. But the big thing I learned was the importance of education. You know, at some point, I was doing a lot of work for juveniles who were accused of some very serious crimes. And these kids were 12, 13, 14 years old, and they had all left school. And they had all left school, and nobody, their parents, the schools, the courts, nobody tried to help them and keep them in school. And so when I met them, the world was against them, and their future did not look good. And sadly, for several of them, their future didn't end up good. But it gave me this undying belief that, you know, birth isn't your destiny, your zip code's not your destiny. We can change lives. We can have people get ahead and have them move forward. And that occurs when we invest in education and when we invest in our people. My time as mayor, I certainly understood that because I went through difficult years. I had the first term was incredibly hard, and then a second term that was prosperous. But it was all about believing in the future and knowing that our best days are still to come. I believe in this state. I love this state. I want this state to have a great future, and I want to be part of it. And I know that we will succeed if we focus on the basics, and that's public education, economic opportunity, and health. Thank you.
Mr. Lee.
I want to share a story to close from the campaign trail that's really been inspiring to me, actually. It was the first day of early voting in the primary, July 13th. And we were going from a town hall in Dunlap in the Sequatchie Valley to another town hall. And we drove through a rural community in Cumberland County. And I got out to get a cup of coffee, got off the RV, walked in the door. And this guy looked at me like he kind of recognized me. And I walked up to him and said, I'm Bill Lee. And he said, I know who you are. I just voted for you. And it was the first time anyone had ever said that to me. And it took me back. It choked me up a little bit. And I took a picture and I walked out of the door. And let me tell you why that was so important to me, that moment on this campaign trail, and there have been many. Because I walked away from that encounter thinking, I don't want to disappoint that guy. That there are voters walking into voting booths all across the state, pushing a button next to my name, people who don't even know me, who are placing their confidence in me to lead at the highest level of the executive branch of government. That is a humbling thing to experience. And I experienced it that day, and broadly what happened is I began to think from that day forward, even today, I don't want to disappoint him. I don't want to disappoint the kids in the inner city that I've worked with. I don't want to disappoint those rural kids in Unicoi County, or I don't want to disappoint plumbers or pipe fitters or teachers, law enforcement. I don't want to disappoint Tennesseans. And so I will say to Tennesseans, if they will give me the opportunity to serve, not only will I work to not disappoint them, but I'll work to do what I think is possible in this state, and that is to not only make life better for our neighbors, our 6.5 million neighbors that are Tennesseans, but I believe that Tennessee can lead the nation with the right leadership. And a governor will not change a nation, change a state. But we, the people, will with the right leadership, and I'd be honored to be that governor of that state and to serve you as a leader. Thank you very much.
Thank you both.